Welcome to the Great Hall of the University of Sydney, to our annual alumni dinner for the University of Sydney Business School. For those of you I haven't had the pleasure of meeting, which I hope I will remedy as the evening goes on, my name is Tyrone Carlin, and I am co-dean, along with my colleague who you'll meet later on, Professor David Grant, of the Business School. That's our joint and very, very great privilege. We have a great night tonight, and I can tell that that's the case, given the fact that we've packed the hall, and given the fact that it was there have been so many great conversations going on, and long may that continue as the night goes on. But this has been a great year for the Business School, and I'll get to some of the reasons for that in a minute. Before I do that, I just want to acknowledge, obviously, Lieutenant General David Morrison, AO, Chief of Army, who's with us this evening as our guest speaker. It's going to be my privilege to introduce him to you a little bit later on. Our Pro-Chancellor, Alec Brennan, Deputy Chancellor, Alan Cameron, and of course, he who has said yes and helped us out so many times this year, our Provost, Professor Stephen Garton, and many, many other people of note. I can't single you all out, but effectively you're all very, very special. But as I said, this has been a special year for the Business School. This has been a year in which we've opened our CBD premises, our city campus at 133 Castlereagh Street. It's been a year where our Abercrombie project has gone from a dream to a real hole in the ground, and we'll be filling it in very, very soon. It's been a year where our industry placement program for our students has seen hundreds of business school students placed in industry for fantastic engaged learning experiences. It's been a year where we've had greater than ever demand for our courses, undergraduate, postgraduate and doctoral courses. It's been a year where we've launched our MBA program. It's been a year where our Global Executive MBA and our Master of Management programs have been ranked number one in Australia by the AFR Boss and the Financial Times respectively. And it's a year when something perhaps even more special than all of that has happened too. And that is a year in which an alumnus of the Business School has stepped into the role as Chancellor. And whilst our Chancellor, Belinda Hutchinson, is indeed Chancellor of the institution as a whole, it is very, very special to us that she is very much part of the Business School family. And I'm going to invite her, on behalf of the university, to come up to the lectern and give an official welcome to the event. And as I do, Chancellor, can I just say to you on behalf of the Business School, we are so enormously grateful for your interest and support in the Business School, in particular your generosity in relation to our Inspired by Business program, which, as you know, is incredibly special to us. And I'm sure that all of our alumni and friends would be absolutely delighted to hear from you. So please join us.
Thank you very much, Tyrone, for that warm welcome. And let me add my welcome to everybody here this evening. As I walked into this room tonight, it was just a wonderful feeling. I ran into so many old friends, acquaintances, people I went to university with. It's a great atmosphere here tonight. But let me start by paying my respects to the elders past and present of Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, on whose land we are meeting this evening. And let me just say, this is a very special evening for me. As an alumni of the Business School, this is a special night for me to be coming back to the university. My first 9 months here has been an extraordinary journey as I've come to grips with what's happening here. And so many times I'm just so impressed by what's happening. Tyrone has spoken about what's been happening in the Business School this year. He's given you a really great outline. But how fantastic that our Master of Management has been voted the #1 Master of Management in the country. How fantastic that the Financial Times has rated our EMBA program as one of the top 50 programs in the world. That is just a huge achievement, and I think it's one of the visible signs of the success of our Business School. And I'm just very, very proud of the Business School, and I really would like to congratulate Tyrone and David and their team on what they have achieved this year and what they've been achieving over the years. One of the highlights for me this year has been the groundbreaking ceremony for the Abercrombie Street Precinct development, which is where our new $250 million business school is going to be located. A number of the Senate fellows who are here this evening joined me for that event. And how special it was that after all these years of us waiting to see a new business school start, it's now coming out of the ground. So in 2015, I'm hoping that I will be able to share the opening ceremony with a lot of you that are here this evening. I'd like to say that in terms of our alumni, you are absolutely the core to our university. The contribution you make is truly valued. And there's a particular group who I'd like to recognise this evening who have come together to form the Business School Alumni Network. And in particular, I'd like to thank Hugh Harley, who is here. And Hugh, I'd like to ask you to stand up, please. Hugh is the inaugural president of our Business School Alumni Network, and he has a great team around him who have really seen the value of having a dynamic and engaged alumni network, and I really thank them for that. Hugh is the leader of PwC's Financial Services business in Australia and also on their Leadership Council and their Global Financial Services Leadership worldwide. And I'd also like to thank those alumni who have agreed to join the network with him for what they're doing. People often ask me what they can do as an alumni to help our university. And one thing I would say to them is please join Hugh and his team in developing our alumni network for the business school. You know, we have alumni around the world. I'll just give you some statistics, just in particular on the business school, which I think is quite remarkable. We have 50,000 alumni based in 100 countries. About 20,000 of them live in New South Wales and more specifically in the Sydney metropolitan area. This provides an extraordinary network for us all. But in addition to what you can do to help the university, it's not only just joining that alumni network, may I also ask you to vote, because we currently have our Senate and Alumni Council elections running. Now, the Senate, as you know, is the guiding oversight body for the university. It plays an incredibly important role in oversighting the strategic development of the university, the operational plans, and all of the things that you would expect a governing body to do. Our alumni on that Senate provide an incredibly important range of advice and input to that strategy and support to the Vice-Chancellor and his team. So may I ask you please to vote. As soon as you get your voting papers, I'm sure you know lots of people who are on that list. We've got 22 candidates this year standing, and I'm sure you will know people who've got good judgment and vision and commitment and energy who can help this university that's developed. And similarly, the Alumni Council elections are underway, and we do have a good team of people standing for the Business School alumni section of that, so please vote on that. The other thing that Tyrone just mentioned was how my husband and I have decided to help the university. I talked about the EMBA program just before, and when that program started, Tyrone and his team and David approached me and asked whether we would be prepared to support a scholarship for that. And I must say, it's wonderful to have Julie Mackay, who was that scholarship winner, with us here this evening. Julie is the Executive Director of UN Women in Australia, and she has gone on to be our Young Alumni Award winner this year. I think that my family and Julie have probably got as much out of that scholarship as each other. And as a result of that, we were approached, I approached the university to see whether we couldn't do something else, which is why we've now decided to take on a range of scholarships for the Inspire program, which is helping those young people from disadvantaged backgrounds to come to our university and study at our business school. And I just encourage any alumni who has that capacity to help to join us in doing something like that. In terms of my first 9 months here, I'm constantly amazed about the work that our team of talented people across this campus do. We have 50,000 students, we have 7,500 staff, we have 16 faculties. We are undertaking world-class education and world-class research. And I invite as many of you as have the time to come and join us and walk around our university and see what's going on. It really is a place that is happening and making a real difference to our community, not only here, but internationally. I'd like to finish by saying that I am very much looking forward to hearing from Lieutenant General David Morrison. I think his topic tonight is so apt. I think if I look back on my career, and I'm so grateful for what this university did for me in terms of providing me with a passport to my career and my life. And as I walked out of this university, I know I got my first job because I had an economics degree, which was in accounting, and I know it's opened many, many more doors for me. But what I have learned as an executive and a non-executive director over the years is that it's not just about the strategy, it's not just about the operational performance of an organisation, it's absolutely about culture and leadership, which provide the pivotal part of success for an organisation. So I think David's topic tonight will be really, really interesting for us, and I'm fascinated to hear what he has to say. Let me finish finally by saying I want to welcome you all, and I want to thank the alumni for the extraordinary contribution that you make to our university. And as I said, I look forward to welcoming you back to the university whenever you want to visit us. Thank you.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you, Chancellor, for those remarks. This is, of course, an alumni-centric event. You might have noticed, I'm sure you enjoyed very much the music that was going on stage earlier on. As our entrees come out, which should be happening imminently, we're going to have the benefit of a jazz trio, and these three very, very talented musicians, Steve, Roy and James, are all alumni of the Conservatorium. I'm sure we can make them alumni of the Business School. Gentlemen, we're looking forward to listening to the beautiful sounds that you're going to make, and I'll be back to introduce our guest speaker a little bit later on, so enjoy your entrees. The President of our Alumni Council, Annie Corlett, has asked me to reinforce the very, very important message that the Chancellor delivered to you earlier on, but particularly in relation to the upcoming Alumni Council elections. And Annie tells me, reliably, and I believe her, that on about the 16th of October, there will be ballot papers that will be mailed out to all of you who I'm sure have contactable mailing addresses, as good alumni do. And there will be 8 candidates for 5 positions from the Business School for the Alumni Council, and we would love it if you participated actively in that, just as you've been entreated to do by the Chancellor. So there you are, Madam President. That is very important. I'm in a bit of a conundrum here in introducing our guest speaker, because the very, very fine staff who've set up the event tonight have given me a biography of David, which is about 50 pages long. And as you know, dinner is after the talk, so I could take the entire allotted time and read you that bio, or I could just say this. David, as he likes to be called, or I shall call him Lieutenant General Morrison, joined the Army in about 1979. I believe that he had gone to that august institution, ANU, and completed a Bachelor of Arts before that. And surprise, surprise, between joining the Army in 1979 and, as he says, somehow ending up as Chief of the Army, he had a very long and very distinguished career in the military and in the Army in particular. And of course, he's with us tonight. And David reckons that that's about all you need to know. How could I differ from his wishes in that regard? So would you please join me in giving him the warmest welcome.
Thank you, Tara. Thank you. Now, So I have asked if I could stand here rather than behind a lectern tonight. To the Chancellor, to the co-deans of the business school, to the alumni here at Sydney University, it is a real honour to have been asked to come to your annual dinner and provide an address. I didn't choose the topic. It somehow ended up in an email that I would speak about leadership and changing culture, and because that is quite a bit of the job that I'm actually filling at the moment as your Chief of Army, it worked for me, and hopefully it will work for you. I'm going to speak for no more than 20 minutes, and I know I stand between you and dinner and the convivial company that's here. So I will be as specific as I can be about a very large topic, and then I know that there is a question and answer period a little bit later, which might tease out areas that you would like to explore subsequent. So what I would like to do is I would like to talk briefly about the Army as a business. I figure that that's very appropriate here in the Great Hall to this august gathering tonight. The Army as a business, the Army as a national institution. What I took on board as I became your Chief of Army in 2011, and what I have had to do, felt I've had to do, been required to do, particularly with regard to culture, in the 3-year appointment that I fill as a statutory appointment. So the Army is a business. It's a workforce of 50,000, 30,000 regular soldiers, male and female, about 20,000 reservists, an annual budget, thank you very much, of just under $5 billion a year, but a discretionary part of that budget, very small, measured in the slightly over 200,000. The bulk of the budget goes to paying for salaries. I was just talking with the Chancellor about that. We too need to be competitive and we need to offer good remuneration to our soldiers and to our officers. We have 70,000 line items of inventory. We're the largest registered training organisation in the country, running over 4,000 individual courses every year. Everything from how you shoot a pistol, to how you fly a helicopter, to how you operate some of the most sophisticated ground radar in the world now. 10% of our workforce is women out of that 50,000, or was. And in terms of a business and terms of output, well, without trying to sound heroic or to sound full of panache, the business that I am in is to prepare soldiers who can fight and win the nation's wars. In some respects, my business is violence. Sanctioned, legal, but nonetheless violent. And indeed, our men and women throughout our history, and I'll talk about our culture in a minute, have been geared towards that. That's important for what I'm about to say about changes we're making to culture. Now, in terms of us as a national institution, we're 112 years old. Gallipoli, Tobruk, Long Tan, they're strands in our DNA. There have been millions of our fellow Australians who have fought the nation's wars, and just under 100,000 of those men and women have their names recorded on the Roll of Honour at the Australian War Memorial because they went at the nation's call and didn't come back. We have, because we exist to fight and win the nation's wars, what you would describe as a warrior culture. And when my fellow Australians think of the Army at all, I think they probably think of it in those terms. They see us marching. They see footage of men and women in Afghanistan or in Iraq or Timor or Bougainville, or historical footage from the First or the Second World War. And there is a real sense of pride in your army. In fact, on any number of surveys, we rank normally the army in the top 3 or 4 of the most trusted institutions in Australia. So we should, given what we do, the service before self that sits at the very centre of Army's culture. And yet, when I became the chief in 2011, we were undergoing the last of 13 major reviews over the last 15 years into our culture. And those 15 reviews had been focused on different aspects of the military, but many of their conclusions were common. That the culture excluded women, excluded men and women from ethnic groupings that weren't traditionally part of our Anglo-Saxon makeup, that tolerated a distortion of the Anzac myth that maintained that if you were white, male, Anglo-Saxon, you must be the natural successor of those men who stormed the beach on the 25th of April 1915. You fought best with a hangover. You never saluted officers, particularly the POMs. You were a natural. You could serve it up to the worst of them and be successful. But if you weren't an Anglo-Saxon male, then there was a question mark over you, and you had to conform to certain tenets of that culture or you would be excluded. And for that reason, we had had these reviews and less than 10% of our workforce was women. I would now like to describe 4 meetings and a revelation and then conclude. The first meeting was with Australia's Sex Discrimination Commissioner, Liz Broderick. She came to see me early in my tenure, and she had been conducting a review at the request of the previous government into a certain event at ADFA around the misuse of Skype that was looking at how women were treated at the Australian Defence Force Academy. And she'd been asked to do a subsequent review about the treatment of women in the ADF. She met me as an incoming chief. She didn't know me, I didn't know her. We finished the meeting not dancing around each other, but with me convinced that some of the conceptions that I had had about our culture, about misbehaviour in our culture, were at least there to be questioned. I had assumed for about 33 years of my 35-year career that the actions that had given rise to those reviews were as a result of aberrant, completely unacceptable, sometimes criminal behaviour, but by rogue individuals, almost exclusively males, that weren't anything other than examples of human nature gone wrong. Liz called on me to think about that, and I started to. And as I started to question myself, I started to ask myself, why do we only have 10% of our workforce as women? What does that say about us as a national institution? We are funded by the families of Australia. Their sons and daughters fill our ranks. We require them to put service before self. And yet, in a business term, our return on investment using 50% of Australia's population was woeful. The second meeting I had was with a very successful woman in an industry I won't name, and I won't name her. And she came as a guest to a dinner that I ran in Sydney. And I got talking with her and I said, look, you're so successful, you're doing this, do you have children? She said, yes, I have 3. I said, gosh, how did the corporation you work for manage you as you took time off in maternity leave 3 times? And she said, well, every time I came back from maternity leave, they promoted me. And I thought, what buy-in does that engender? What loyalty does that have as say about the institution? What do we do in the army? We're hierarchical. We have a very ordered judgment of merit. We don't accommodate women taking time off to pursue another interest or to have a child. In fact, what we do is we give them maternity leave, pretty generous maternity leave, but we dock them in terms of time in rank. And time in rank, like any of the people that work for any of the corporations, institutions, public or private, represented in this room, time in rank, time in position is a key determinant for selection. The third meeting was at the behest of Liz Broderick. She said, I've been doing this review into how we treat our women. Would you come along to Sydney and speak with 3 women, 2 serving, 1 who has left the army, who have been affected by their service? Now, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to give myself some credit here. I am 57 years old. I am an Anglo-Saxon white male. I have never been discriminated against for either my sex, my sexual preference, or my religion, certainly my sex or my colour. But I have been brought up by and surrounded by very strong women, and I would like to think that I have a deep altruistic streak in me that wants to give everyone a fair go. In the course of 6 hours, sequentially, 3 women told me their story about what had happened to them in our army. I won't go into the details, but at the end of the most harrowing day of my 35-year career, the most harrowing day, I questioned everything I thought I knew about our culture. They had been stripped of their respect. They had been assaulted, either physically or mentally, and the system, the institution, our culture, had left them absolutely short. So much so that all of them had questioned whether they could continue to serve, and one had left. The 4th meeting was with a group of infantry soldiers, all men, in the Chora Valley in Afghanistan, just after the previous government had opened all of our ranks and trades to women. Very, very appropriate, highly supported by the leadership team in the ADF. That included infantry. Now, I am an infantryman by training. It is a tough life. It is all male. They're at the sharp end of the spear. These men had been beyond the wire for 4 months. Comrades had been badly hurt as a result of enemy action. They took me to task in a dusty little operating base in the Chora Valley in Afghanistan, and they basically said, and they didn't gild the lily at all, hey, listen, we're doing it really, really hard, and we know that it's important that we are successful. You cannot believe that a woman would add value to the work that we are being asked to do. So they were asked, well, what are you doing? Is your job not to protect the Afghan population here in the Chora Valley? To which, of course, the answer was yes. And then a second question was asked. Well, how many Afghan women have you spoken to? And of course, the answer was 0. And while the lights may not have come on for those young men who were standing, sweat-stained, dusty, angry to a degree, something clicked with me. Changing culture in a 112-year-old institution can be done for one of 2 broad reasons. Firstly, because it's correct to do it. Correct. We are, after all, living in a modern society. Australia wants its army to be a reflection of that society. We're making poor use of the number of women from that society who want to join our Defence Force, let alone our army. But the second reason is the one that I focused on. having had those 3 previous meetings and then this one in Afghanistan. It's about capability. It's about being not just a reflection of society, but a force that can be robust, relevant, fight and win the nation's wars in the 3rd decade of this century, not just now. And to achieve that, I am absolutely certain that we have to have greater diversity, not just in terms of the employment of people from ethnic groups who don't traditionally join our army, but most particularly for me, women. And so I won't spend any more time, because my time is up. I won't spend any more time going into the details. But I must say, lived and breathed this now. I've had the opportunities to speak at the United Nations about women and about how women need to be given a fair go. How when a gender diverse organisation actually hits its straps, it is the most capable. And that applies for every business that is represented here tonight, most of all from my perspective, the Australian Army. We do exist to serve the nation. We live in the best country on earth. You do have the best army, I can promise you. But it needs to be better. It needs to have a more inclusive culture, because if it doesn't, it won't be the capable force you need. I'm happy to take any questions, detail and policy. There are many other things that I could say here, but it is such a large topic, and I don't want to get bogged down, particularly as you're enjoying each other's company and dinner is waiting. So thank you again to the Chancellor, to the co-deans, to the alumni for the opportunity to come and speak to you. I do look forward to a question and answer session where I can be pinned to the wall about how I'm spending that $5 billion every year. Very wisely, I can assure you, making every dollar count. It's great to be able to join you here this evening. Thanks very much.
I think it's now very, very clear to everyone why it really wasn't necessary to read that long biography. Quality certainly shines through. Thank you so much for those words. And as you say, and we're grateful for it, there will be an opportunity for question and answer after dinner, which is imminent, after which my co-dean, Professor Grant, will be back. So please enjoy your dinner. Thank you.
Good evening. I'm David Grant, and along with Tyrone Carlin, I have the honour of being co-dean of the University of Sydney Business School, and I very much hope that you're enjoying your evening, and I'd like to add my welcome to those given by the Chancellor and Tyrone earlier, and to also thank you for your support tonight. It's great to see so many familiar, friendly faces. So a little earlier, we heard from Lieutenant General David Morrison, our guest speaker, on the critical role that leadership plays in establishing and sustaining organisational culture, and I'm sure, in fact, I'm certain that his thoughts and observations stimulated much conversation at your tables as it did at ours. And it's now my pleasure to invite David back to the stage so as to give you an opportunity to ask him a few questions. We have about 15 minutes and a couple of roving mics. If you do ask a question, I'd ask you to just introduce yourself and to try and keep the question reasonably short so as to give others an opportunity to ask questions as well. So, okay. While you're gathering your thoughts, I might take advantage of my position up here and very quickly ask a question of David. David, you talked very much in your earlier about the problematic areas of army culture, if you will, and how that had affected issues of diversity and gender. But I do think that there are some very positive elements of army culture, and surely you would have used those to your advantage in dealing with the very problem that you were or problems you were talking about.
No, well, thank you, David, and you're absolutely right. And if I gave you in any way the impression that I wasn't the great advocate for the Australian Army, then I'd like to be thankful that you gave me the opportunity to correct it, because I am. It is a great national institution, and I have been so lucky to have, a little bit by happenstance, joined the Army all those years ago, and it has given back to me far more than I have ever given to it. And it's largely because of the quality of the men and women who I have had the opportunity of serving with and who have shown me in so many ways all the best of life's lessons. Like most institutions or businesses, we have tried to frame our core values, and we describe ourselves, as I'm sure many of the organisations represented here tonight do, as a values-based organisation. For many years we had three values. Courage, that's physical and moral. Initiative, because we want to be a smart army and we want to have that smart edge in a battle space. And teamwork, because armies are teams. The challenges around culture that we've faced this year particularly have led us to conclude at a senior level that we need to add a fourth value. And we have taken a fair bit of time to decide to do that. We knew what the value was, but we're hierarchical and we're traditional and we respect our 112 years, but we decided that the value that was missing most was respect, because that went to the heart of courage, initiative and teamwork. And so I found myself in a position of launching a value. It's not as material as a ship. I hope it has greater longevity. I think it will, and I think it probably goes to the heart, as most really successful values do, of having that resonance with a workforce that ranges in age from 18 through to 69. I just approved an age extension for, well, I can say it here, Nick Jans, to serve through to, who will be known to some, through to 69. So those values have to have resonance. We are building on a platform. We are trying to change our culture. There are systemic issues that need to be addressed and changed to embrace inclusivity as well as diversity. But no one, most of all me, wants to make Army any less capable. And I think that the values that we focus on will allow us to do all of that and more. So thank you for the question.
I've seen a number of hands around. We have one on the table at the back. Question?
Hi, Kate O'Reilly. One of the biggest challenges in the kind of cultural change that you've been discussing is driving it down through middle management. And in such a large organisation like the Army, how are you intending to do that?
Kate, thank you very much for that question. That is the real issue for me now. So having decided as the leader of the Army, professional head of the Army, over this 3 years, that our culture needed to be addressed in systemic ways, and articulated that to a 50,000 person workforce and indeed to, I think, in some respects, the Australian population. It isn't hard to get buy-in from like-minded men and women. That's almost a given. So when the organisation finds itself under stress, as we have in recent months around the aberrant behaviour of a group of men, where as the Army's leader I've chosen to be quite public about that and explain in broad terms, although to great discomfort of a number of lawyers, what they may or may not have done and what I intend to do about it. There has been a lot of very supportive, very positive reaction to it. And you don't waste a crisis, I guess, and you use that to build on the messages that you're already trying to convey to your workforce. The senior leadership of Army don't have anything than 100% buy-in here, men and women. That's almost, but not quite a given. I mean, you have to respect their own experiences and accord them the opportunities to give you their views, because they will modify yours and it will go to adding to the sum of the parts. The junior soldiers, well, in part, they do what they're told, in part, because we are that disciplined hierarchical organisation. But I'll say this, while I don't buy into all of the arguments around how generations differ from succeeding or preceding generations, I do think that the young men and women that make up Australia today, that Generation Y and the generation that will come after it, are much more inclusive and open to diversity than men and women of my own age. Now, that doesn't mean that men won't behave badly and women to that extent. The real challenge has been dealing with the middle ranks, middle management, who, for very understandable reasons, feel that change actually runs counter to what they believe are the central tenets of the organisation that they have given their life to. Now, in Army's case, middle management will have deployed more often than not once, not twice, but sometimes 3 or more times. They will have commanded or been part of organisations that have fought the nation's wars, and they do feel that change is a threat, not a capability enhancement. You can do 2 things. And the first one is the most important. You can come back and back and back to the well and ask them to sup from the cup that you're offering. Have them get to a point where they understand that this isn't a threat to the core tenets of the organisation. It is about making the Army robust, relevant in the 3rd decade of the century. And I am confident that now, and certainly by the end of my tenure, that the overwhelming majority of middle management will be in that position. The second course of action you can take is say, if you can't accommodate the change, then you need to find somewhere else to serve or develop your professional career. Okay. That's a clear message that I have given to our Army. And while I don't talk about a particular message that I gave to the Army that has been seen by a number of other people, I do mean what I said. If you cannot appreciate why inclusivity and diversity makes us a more capable Army, able to fight and win the nation's wars, and I cannot convince you, and my command chain can't convince you, and the people that you work with can't convince you, then you need to leave, because there is no longer a place for you. Thank you for your service. Australia will be better for it, but we now need to part company because we're moving on.
Thank you. Question on the front table here.
Peter King is my name. Thank you very much for your excellent address and its delivery. My question is this. How do you deal with troops on the front line as distinct from those who are your officers at ADFA? Do you take a different approach to the address or not?
Look, you're talking about the cadets that were involved in the Skype incident, Peter? The easy answer is you don't make any distinction. You treat everybody in a uniformed organisation the same, and you accommodate them because they belong to that uniformed organisation with the same degree of equality. If you get it right, you're praised. If you get it wrong, you're held to account and taken to task. It, of course, isn't that easy, and it isn't that easy because, well, it isn't that simple. The young men who were involved in the ADFA Skype could be perceived in one respect as being much more the product of Australian society than the ADF, but I don't believe that. That was a view I used to hold, but I don't believe it now. They were being inculcated into our military. They were being asked right from the very first day that they signed up to adhere to the values of the organisation. Whether they had served for a day or 10 weeks or 10 years or 15 years or, in my case, 35 years. It's either in or out. And so soldiers who don't follow the core values need to be judged in exactly the same way. One of the issues that I've been dealing with over the course of the last few months is that the men who are alleged to have committed particularly abhorrent acts aren't cadets of 10 weeks stature, they're men of 10 or 15 years service. Without going into any detail, some of them have served in an operational sense to the highest level at the call of the nation. But there is no accommodation for that. I can't separate them because they've served on operations and done so well, and at the same time separate cadets who have been in the military for 10 weeks and haven't lived to our standards. There are core values that sit in our institution. They make us the army. They make us the only force in Australia that is charged under the Constitution with fighting and winning the nation's wars. And if I sound dramatic in that, I don't apologise, because I believe it. And that's the message. Young, middle rank, middle management, a poobah like myself, there is one standard, there is one group of values that we will all live to, male, female, black, white, Christian, Hindi, Muslim. It doesn't matter. You are in the army. That is your skin. Live to it or don't. We're a volunteer army.
Got one question on the back table, and then several at the front here that we'll move towards.
Frank Perry, Alumni Council. Many large organisations have a lot of different professions within them who have their own cultures. And often these create silos within the organisation. Is this an issue for the Australian Army?
Oh, very much.
And if so, is there ways that we can overcome it?
Look, a great question. Yes, Army is made up, like Air Force and Navy, and I dare say a lot of organisations, but I can only speak about the Army, made up of a large group of tribes that are largely given over to internecine feuding. So, you know, you've got your infantrymen, and you've got your gunners, and you've got your tankies, and you've got your Ordnance Corps, and you've got your lawyers and your doctors, and you've got your generals. You know, they're all well off to the side. And there is within those tribes, tribal cultures. The army is a tribe in some respects. You know, we are a reflection of our society, and we need to be as close a reflection as is possible. But we are nonetheless tribal in a way that does delineate us from other professions within the Australian society. And within that bigger tribe there are many sects. That's SECTS. How you work at that has been one of the real challenges for me. And it's a great question, because you want the organisation to go forward, you want to make it more capable, you don't want to demean what largely our men in the infantry, in the commandos, in the Special Air Service Regiment have done, for example, in Afghanistan, which is brutal, lethal, deeply confronting, very close combat. where 3 Victoria Crosses have been awarded over the course of the last 5 years. You don't want to demean that. That's what the nation looks to. And at the same time, you don't want to demean what people who are in charge of our information services and communication systems are doing, because they've got to be the smartest of the smart. We're a digital age, and at the moment the Army's an analogue army in that digital age. And we're only going to be a digital force with the skills of a large group of men and women who are probably not aged much more than 30, and many of them, the majority, much younger than that. And you've got to find a way of working those tribes in the right way along a broader path that the whole army can march. But I think we've got that, and I think it goes back to the point that David was talking about, having values that have resonance not just for the individuals of the army, but the tribes of the army. Courage, initiative, respect, teamwork. And as I speak to the majority of the army on a pretty regular basis, face to face, much more than through a video message, and I give emphasis to those values, I don't have any doubt that that is understood. And that's the unifying themes that bring us together in the service of the nation. That's pretty good. I think in that respect, we're doing a great job.
So we have some questions towards the front here.
Gordon Towell, General. The Australian public's view of the Australian Army is obviously focused on Gallipoli, Kokoda, Milne Bay, Korea, Vietnam, etc. In today's world, Australia's a very small country with a very small population, and it's becoming, obviously, to be effective, the Army has to be very technology-based to meet the mass of population that's, without mentioning any countries north of us and northwest of us. Can you give us some comments about how you're tackling that challenge, which is quite a significant challenge, I assume?
Oh, I've got to tell you, it is so great to get a question about military capability. Thank you, Gordon. Look, the Australian Army has been through an interesting history from that period 112 years ago when we came into being, when just after Federation, the colonial forces on operations in the Boer War in South Africa coalesced as a Commonwealth force, and we became the Australian Army. Throughout our history, you know, through the First World War, Second World War, Milne Bay that you mentioned, Korea, Vietnam, and so on after that, we've relied on the quality of our people, but we've also relied as a small army within a small defence force, even in times of national mobilisation, on a technological edge. So our diggers in the First World War were well equipped, and our soldiers over the last 12 years have been very well equipped. A case in point, a soldier getting off a ship on the port in Dili in Timor in 1999 with everything on his or her back, but let's say they're infantrymen, on his back, from the helmet through to the boot with the weapon, $2,000 worth of equipment on every individual. The same soldier, currently out beyond the wire in Afghanistan, from top to tail weapon, the equipment is now valued at $25,000 per person. That's what the nation has made a commitment to. As the Chief of Army, I'm deeply grateful. It has kept our soldiers not just alive, but very successful operationally. You need to be able to not just harness the skill sets within your organisation, but you need to work with industry or with coalition partners such as the United States, but others, in order to ensure that a small, relatively small nation in population terms, with a very small military, I mean, the army is only 50,000 in a country our size, has the ability to fight and win the nation's wars. We do that because we have the right approach, not just the right values, but the right remuneration and the right engagement with industry and the right support from governments of either political persuasion who have learnt the lessons of the past and are now, I think, applying them appropriately in the future. Thank goodness for it. Then the nation should be confident that the military, Navy, Army and Air Force are moving down the right path in that respect as well. I have spoken publicly about my concerns about budget and the need to invest appropriately in the nation's security, and while this isn't certainly the forum where I would do that tonight, I would at least make the point that in a country with an annualised GDP of over $1 trillion, a landmass equivalent to North America, a population of 25 million that will crest 30 million probably within the next 15 to 20 years, an army of 50,000, an ADF of 100,000, will only be able to meet the requirements of that nation if it is appropriately resourced and supported. And I think we're there at the moment, but we shouldn't make the mistakes we made after Vietnam. That opens a whole gamut of issues which I don't feel appropriate to go into tonight. Thank you for asking the question, though.
So we've got a question on the table in the middle, and then I think we might have another one at the back. How are you travelling, David? All right?
Paul Simidas, sir. Good to see you here tonight. I have two questions. What effect did your university education have on what you did later in life? And secondly, it's been a big week for the Navy. How have you coped with all that, sir?
Oh dear. Well, I'll answer the last question first. One of my close friends is the Chief of the Navy, Vice Admiral Ray Griggs. I was here to help celebrate the centenary of the arrival of the first flotilla on Sydney Harbour on Saturday, and I spoke at the Sea Power conference on Monday. And the main theme of the speech that I gave to well over 1,000 people, many of them Navy, but others as well, was that Australia needs its ADF, its Australian Defence Force, more than it needs its Army, its Navy or its Air Force. That we have to be that joint force if we're going to be able to meet the challenges, the security challenges of the future. So it was wonderful to be a part of it, and I was honoured to be there. And I mean that. And as an infantryman, I've spent far too much of my time at sea anyway. So in terms of my university education, I was an indifferent student, I must say. I would like to call it an eclectic education. Many others, including both my parents who helped support me through my education, would describe it as ill-disciplined. But having been a university student during the 70s, I was given the opportunity after secondary school of expanding my universe. And look, I wasn't a great student, but I read books, argued ideas, met people that if I hadn't been at ANU in 1975 through to the end of 1978, I would never have done. And it has changed me fundamentally. And I am still, I hope, able to embrace new ideas and arguments based on logic that contest the views I might have or indeed the values I might hold in a way that allows me to arrive at conclusions that will take any organisation that I'm a part of, but me as an individual, both of that, forward as a result of university education. And I would think that that is very much the ideal of any of us who have been students at a university and anyone who is working in the university sector now. Without education, you cannot deal with the challenges of the unknown. You only are able to deal with what you know. That doesn't work for humanity, doesn't work for our society, certainly doesn't work for our army.
Okay, we've got time for 2 more questions. I know we've got one at the back, I think, and then one on the table in the front. Maybe not at the back. It's very hard to see the lights. So we go Charles, and then one at... I have a queue, sorry.
In your speech earlier, you gave the assertion that Australia had the best army in the world. I'd be willing to bet there are at least a dozen other heads of armies in the world who would say the same thing in a
Only
similar
a dozen.
speech. A dozen you wouldn't laugh at. How can the citizens of a nation assess the quality of their army, both against some standard of what's necessary for that country and against other armies?
That is a deep philosophical question. That's a university education for you, even an indolent one. How does a nation decide that it wants an army? Why? I mean, why do armies exist? You can go back past Thucydides to ask yourself the same question, and yet armies have always existed. It is, I think, a trait of humanity that we contest with each other, and not just in an intellectual sense, but in a physical sense. And of course, when you marry the intellectual and the physical, often, unfortunately, in the development of mankind, it will manifest itself in what we know as military confrontation or war, and hence armies do exist. The real dangers come when the army that is part of that manifestation of society operate either separately or at variance to the society from which they grow or are spawned. And there are many contemporary and historical examples of that, not in this country. In every case, the Australian Army has operated here or overseas. In the 112 years of our history, we have met to the letter of the law what the nation has required of us. We have employed an expansive national strategy that has seen Australia a part of the globe, not just the region or the continental landmass that we know of Australia, from 1901, where the Army came into being, on the veldt in South Africa. Our men and women, the millions who have served in the same uniform that I wear today, under the Rising Sun badge, under the slouch hat, have been, I think, now this is a subjective view and one that no one here I sure would take issue with from the Chief of Army, have been in many respects the finest examples of our society. They have protected populations. They have supported men and women in troubled areas around the globe throughout that history. They have fought where they have had to, but they have done so with compassion. And in that respect, they have, I think, exemplified the best of what we, all of us, the citizens of this country, see as Australia and our dream of Australia. And if I sound somewhat prosaic about that, I make, again, no apology, because I am the professional head of this institution, and I wake up every morning, driven from my bed, believing that I am in charge of an organisation that is the best that this nation can produce. I don't, I think, answer your question completely, but I'm going to leave it at that.
David, can I ask you to take 2 more questions?
Yes, sure. So I mean, I don't want to take up people's time, and I am happy to take questions.
So I think, Peter, do you have one?
General Peter Fitzsimons.
Peter?
I think I speak on behalf of everybody when I say we all think how wonderfully well you've spoken for somebody who was educated only at ANU. It's a joke. It's a joke. We know each other. It's all right. You've mentioned Tobruk, you've mentioned Gallipoli, and you've mentioned Long Tan. What is the historical military episode in Australian history that most inspires you?
Oh, right, okay. Well, you know, last year was the 70th anniversary of 1942. And 1942, of course, was the only year that this country believed, as a community, that it faced an existential military national threat. And that was obviously with the Imperial Japanese advance through Southeast Asia and the broader Pacific. And so last year I took 4 veterans of the battles along the Kokoda track back to New Guinea for Anzac Day. And after the dawn service at Bamana War Cemetery, we flew 4 of these men, the youngest of whom was 90, the eldest of whom was 94, in an Army Black Hawk helicopter up to Ishiarava, which sits above Kokoda along the track. For 2 of them, it was the first time they had been back there since they had been falling back against the Japanese advance along the Kokoda track to Port Moresby. The helicopter shut down. It shut down on the pad at Ishiarava. And there were about 200 young Australians, primarily, well, almost overwhelmingly young Australians, who were doing the trek from Kokoda through to the crossing above Goldie River near Port Moresby. And as the helicopter shut down and these 4 old men were helped out, 200 Australians stood and clapped and didn't stop clapping as they walked down from the helipad to this extraordinary memorial at Ishiarava, which overlooks Kokoda. Now, gosh, you know, it is not considered, appropriate for the Chief of Army to well up in front of the Sydney Business School, but every time I tell this story, I can't stop the emotions of being there. Kokoda wasn't our only defining moment. We have many in our nation's history. But to see how young Australians connected with men of 94 years of age, not because of the existential threat that faced the country, but because of what they did in putting, and I know I use this term a fair bit, Peter, but service before self, that's life-changing for them, for me, and for the young Australians who were there. So that would be my answer.
And we have one last question. I
That's
think it
you,
really
Alex,
has to be at the front. We've had, yeah. Thank you.
David, I wondered if you could comment on some recent media coverage of the effects of post-traumatic stress disorder, which clearly affects a lot of soldiers, both while they're overseas and on their return. I guess particularly on the question of culture and how you respond to that within an environment like the Army that clearly needs to be strong and tough and achieve all the things that you achieve. I just wondered if you could comment on that, please.
I will, thank you.
The Army's response.
Thank you, Alex, and happy birthday for yesterday.
Thank you.
The price that all of our fellow citizens who serve in the military pay for their service is recognised in this country in an exceptional way. We have Anzac Day and we have Remembrance Day on the 11th of November, but certainly as a serviceman or service person, I do feel the support of my community. I mean, it's not just because I get out in organisations such as, meetings or dinners such as this, everywhere I go, I have exceptional support being offered to our men and women in uniform by our community, and that's fantastic, because it wasn't always that way in Australia. My father was a battalion commander in Vietnam, and I was a teenager while he was in Vietnam in 1969, and I have very clear memories of his battalion marching through the streets of Adelaide on their return from Vietnam, where in that one unit over 30 soldiers had been killed in 1 year and being booed by sections of our society. Now, it's a democracy, and I don't make a critical comment about that. We should be big enough, and we are, to accommodate it. But in doing so, we need to be able to look at the price that individuals pay when they choose to serve in our military, either on operations or just as part of the rigours, meeting the rigours of military service. I think that we have been really world-class in our response to dealing with physical wounds. And we've had well over 200 soldiers seriously injured in Afghanistan. Limbs lost, eyesight lost, hearing lost. And as a nation, we've cocooned them in many respects. And that's, I think, says a great deal about our society. In terms of those that have suffered internally, we have been not less supportive, but we have been less aware. And that's not just our society, but more particularly our military. And I think that, like many militaries, we have been slow to respond to it. But the big issue here, Alex, that separates us from the experience of my father and the soldiers that he led in Vietnam is that the society is not prepared to shut them away and consign them to dusty pages of history and not accommodate them into our society as returned servicemen and women. Australia has, I think, embraced the challenge of how do you deal with the stress as a result of your service or what you have done on operations. We are less than perfect, but I do think we are making really important headway. The real issue for me as the leader at the moment is to say to our workforce of serving men and women who are feeling as though their circumstances of military service, either on operations or in Australia, have changed them but not in a beneficial way, is that there is no stigma attached to that, and they need to feel confident that they can come forward and their message will be heard. Some respects, middle management, to go back to an earlier question asked by Kate, is the people that we have to convince in this regard, but I think that we're on the right path. And I think it says a lot about our military, but it says even more about who we are as a national society, that we are prepared to take these challenges on and make a difference in a way that no other generation in response to their servicemen and women coming home from the war have been able to do. So you chart our history from the Boer War through the First World War, Second World War, Korea and Vietnam, we're better than that as a society. And that, I think, is a nice point to conclude on because I've probably taken up too much time. We are a better society. Thank you, Alex. Thank you, David. Thank you.
Thank you, David. I've been asked to give a vote of thanks this evening, and you can already tell from the warmth of the applause that your talk, your Q&A session was greatly appreciated. It's been a privilege to hear you talk, David, and you've provided some fascinating insights into Army culture and the challenges and opportunities that that it presents to its leadership. And listening to you talk, much of the Army culture that you've described is, from what we've heard of tonight anyway, built out of values and behaviours that you suggested in the Q&A session are centred on four things. First one of those was initiative and a capacity to think creatively and respond quickly to rapidly changing environments. The second is the team-working ethos, one that inspires personnel to work for each other in highly productive ways. The third is courage, and I'm including moral courage here, and we didn't talk about moral courage tonight, but when I talk about courage, and when you talk about courage, I think it's about putting one's own safety and interests after those of others around you and those that you presumably serve to protect. And fourth and finally, that basic principle that you raised, that principle of respect. Respect for the other person, respect for human dignity, and for processes of justice. And these are what the Army now seeks to put into practice, and they're core to, you are suggesting, core to giving it the capability to serve the nation effectively. And I'm drawing attention to those values for two other reasons. The first is a simple one. They give us good cause, all of us here tonight, to go home and reflect on our own organisational cultures and the extent to which they should already do reflect these values. But the second is more about reflecting on David and his leadership style. Making sure you have the right organisational culture in place is a big challenge for leaders across all organisations, not just the Army. And to do so requires a set of leadership attributes that not everyone has. And one of the most important attributes, I think, is an ability to be able to connect with those that work with you and for you. And that connection is achieved by more than simply what we'd call communication. It's achieved by, and it may be a trite saying, but it's achieved by leading by example. And I believe that it's that, certainly in part, that has helped you, David, to be the effective and highly inspiring leader that you are. Your talk tonight demonstrated a passion and a commitment to practicing the very values that you expect of your colleagues and that you expect your colleagues to practice: initiative, teamwork, courage and respect. So David, we acknowledge and salute your tremendous achievements as Chief of the Army and as a leader. The legacy I think that you're going to leave is one that you should be proud of. Thank you for such an inspiring, thoughtful speech. We're indebted to you for taking the time to be with us tonight. So please join me once again in thanking Lieutenant David.
Thank you very much. Thank you, David. Thank you very much for those kind words and the opportunity. I really appreciate it.
I have a little gift to give you first. And on behalf of the school, I do have a small gift as a token of our appreciation. So once again, thank you, David.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Well, that pretty much wraps up the formalities for this evening. I'd like to conclude by observing that, and I'm sure Tyrone will agree with me in this, one of the pleasures of being co-dean of the school is that you get to interact with so many talented, committed alumni, and the fact that you are very proud of your links with the school and unfailingly willing to put back into it is both humbling and inspiring. So on behalf of the school and the university, and of Tyrone and myself, we thank you for your support in 2013, and we look forward to your continued support as we move into 2014, and to our being able to share further good news with you about the many exciting developments in the school that are due to take effect next year. So I invite you now to enjoy the rest of the evening. I believe dessert will be served. Thank you very much indeed, and good night.